Hello, and thank you for joining. My name is Jennifer Hill, and I'm a biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Conservation Training Center, or NCTC, in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And I coordinate the Native Youth Climate Adaptation Leadership Congress, a week-long on-site program for Indigenous high school youth to grow in their leadership skills. We welcome your questions and comments anytime during the broadcast by using the chat, or you can email them to broadcast@fws.gov. If we don't get to your comments or questions today, we will do our best to follow up with you afterwards. Before introducing today's facilitator, I would like to acknowledge that the National Conservation Training Center is located on the unceded ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. While we could not find a full account, we are aware that many peoples traversed, cherished, and lived on this land. They include the Massawamak, the Haudenosaunee, the Shawnee, and the Delaware. As we learn more about the Indigenous peoples who continue to have relationships with this land, we better appreciate the good earth on which we work, live, and learn. We pledge to grow and sustain relationships with Indigenous communities through collaboration on our training, outreach, youth programs, museum exhibits, and more. And we encourage others to learn more about the land on which they work and reside. Today, Lonyx Landy, nor Rel Muk Wintu will facilitate the broadcast and introduce our speakers. In addition to Lonyx facilitating, we did send out a request for pre-questions that we will try to address in today's broadcast. Now, a little about Lonyx. Lonyx Landy is a citizen of the Rel Muk Wintu Nation and a self-determined Indigenous-minded person. Lonyx is the Native Coordinator at Cal Poly Humboldt in the Indian Natural Resources, Science, and Engineering Program and Diversity in STEM. He's appointed by his tribe to represent the interests of Native Americans in Trinity County as a council member to the North Coast Indian Development Council. Founder and director of the federal contract eligible Indian organization, the Intertribal Student Services, and appointed by his supervisor to the County of Humboldt's Planning Commission Board. Lonyx has a bachelor's of Science in Biology and will soon possess a Master's of Science in Natural Resource, Forest, Wetlands, and Wildland Sciences from Cal Poly Humboldt. Additionally, Lonyx has been a longtime supporter of our Native youth programming, and he is a very trusted and well-revered colleague for the National Conservation Training Center. Welcome, Lonyx. I hope you will please share your thoughts around Indigenous science prior to introducing our guest speakers.
Well, hi, Jen, and thank you. And thank you all who are participating and listening in here. And I hope that we can facilitate your understanding, or should I say deeper understanding, because lots of us are aware of the term now, the term traditional ecological knowledge. This isn't necessarily a term that has come from Indigenous peoples. This is a term that has come from the Western academia. And what we hope to communicate with you all is a deeper understanding of this term. And starting out here would be some of my take on this term. And sometimes we can get lost in words, right? And sometimes words have certain meanings, like traditional. Does that mean like we're stuck in old, that it's merely an old way? And when we're talking about and describing this Indigenous knowledge, it's never stagnant. It's never just past tense. It is past, and it is certainly drawing off of our ancestors' knowledge. And it is also present, right? Kind of like with the concept of in Western science, that we are standing on the shoulders of the scientists and the folks before us. The same in Indigenous knowledge systems. We are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, to use the same type of metaphor. And so it's not an old thing. It's an ongoing thing. It's a flourishing thing. And it's an all-encompassing thing. And it's bigger than just the concept of science. And when I think about the concept of science, I'm thinking about observation, testing, and going back to that. Well, that same practice has been happening with indigenous peoples for a long, long time, since time immemorial. And so that can help add a foundation that broadens our concept of Western science or science. And, I think another thing that indigenous people realize is that this concept of science, which absolutely is practiced by people all over the world and has been since time immemorial, this concept of science, in some respects, it has been commandeered by a Eurocentric mind and ways of thinking. So when we start talking about this term, traditional ecological knowledge, we are talking about something bigger and broader and more encompassing than just that. I think it would be more appropriate to say that Western science fits under the umbrella of indigenous science, or the term that we are all tend to utilize now, being traditional ecological knowledge. And I would say the foundation of it, as it continues on and was and is and continues, the foundation of it is all about relationships. So we have a couple folks on who are going to share their personal take on this term and perhaps give some examples of their region of what this relationship to place, how that plays out, and how that can improve the questions we ask as scientists and the way we approach problem solving and looking at things and understanding things. And so, like I said, this is all encompassing, this term, or what the term is trying to get at for indigenous people is kind of an all encompassing thing, right? This is beyond your ability to measure. And it goes into the spirit. It goes into all kinds of different elements of our existence, in that everything is related, everything is connected, and coming from that understanding and broadening our awareness is kind of something that we hope we get out of this presentation. So one of our first speakers to talk about this, and coming from the Southwest region, is Sarah Rankovich. And she received her PhD in wildlife conservation from the University of Arizona School of Natural Resources and the Environment in 2012. Her research focused on reintroduced populations of Mexican gray wolves on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation in Arizona. She has worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in endangered species conservation since 1993 and currently works in the branch of recovery and restoration. Sarah works exclusively with tribes in the Southwest with regard to management and conservation of endangered species on tribal lands, promoting the use of traditional ecological knowledge where appropriate. So, Sarah, take over from there, and anything I left out about introducing you, please fill in the blanks, and let's get your take on this term and what it means to you.
Thank you. That was excellent introduction. And yes, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, is very academic for something that is old. And so I do prefer indigenous knowledge. So I'm going to talk to you, my presentation today is on indigenous knowledge and cultural significance of gray wolves. And I'm going to cover just very briefly the TEK and the federal decision making. A couple of examples that are just fairly recent that are excellent for incorporating TEK into some of the services decision making, include the Alexander Archipelago Wolf Project, the gray wolf in the western US, and the Mexican wolf in Arizona, which I was involved with, as well as, I'm just gonna, if I have time, I'm gonna touch on this one issue on desert bald eagle, because it was pretty fascinating. So in 2021, November, the White House and CEQ came out with a memo saying that they were going to develop a guidance document for indigenous knowledge, and it has been finalized. So November 30th, 2022, this guidance has been finalized, and they are forming working groups right now and you'll probably be seeing some training. So this is excellent. Email us if you need a copy of this excellent document. And I've been working in this field for, I should say, promoting TEK, Indigenous knowledge, for over 2 decades. And this is just something really amazing that has just come out. So the Alexander Archipelago wolf, the service was petitioned to list this subspecies of gray wolf, let's just say in 2020. And the service was going to put together a species status assessment, has been putting together a species status assessment for this species that is not listed to make a listing decision in 2023. And this subspecies the population occurs in Southeast Alaska and British Columbia. I was not involved with this project, but so interesting. The service hired a ethnographer, a person who was well respected in the community, and interviewed a dozen or so Indigenous knowledge holders of this subspecies, and put together a report that is an appendix in the species status assessment for this species. And there was incredible information that they got that filled some of the Western science gaps, that included information from observation on wolf health, wolf movement, and wolf diet. This is an interesting subspecies that occurs on the coastal end, eats fish sometimes. So very interesting subspecies that some knowledge gaps were filled by interviews. The one that I was recently involved with regards to the wolf was a project that I worked on, Indigenous and Cultural Significance of Gray Wolves in the Western US. And I say cultural significance because as Lonyx said, it's a relationship. You can't separate the science from the cultural importance. So my mission was to collect as much Indigenous knowledge as possible from our Mountain Prairie region, who reached out to me and wanted this information included in their species status assessment. And this is not including the Mexican wolf, which I will get to. So the objective was to hear from Indigenous knowledge holders about the wolf. And I met with Indigenous knowledge holders, and also met with natural resource directors and tribal historic preservation officers. So we were on a very limited time. I only had a couple of months. And so I did travel and meet with several Indigenous knowledge holders and directors that did know knowledge about the wolves from these tribes. And I was at a little bit of a disadvantage because I didn't have a relationship with these tribes. But just showing up and not talking to people over the phone or sending letters really made this project very successful. So what I did is unstructured interviews, which is not questions. I had very simple questions because I only had a limited time, and I didn't have a relationship with people. So I asked very basic questions. What is the wolf called in your native language? And there's so much information in a name. And so I did meet with in-person interviews with Nez Perce, Blackfeet Nation. And then I did some virtual, because I did meet with these people and they didn't have time to meet with me in person. So we did do a couple of virtual. And they were very interested that I was coming up and wanting to collect this information. So I also had in-person meetings with Salish Kootenai and Northern Arapaho. And again, I was limited on time, so it was only June through August that I did this. And the key themes with this project were the wolf is a central figure in stories. Stories are so important in terms of passing on information. As Lonyx said, standing on the shoulders of ancestors, there was so much information in stories. And I just have to say, and of course the wolf is significantly important to these tribes that I talk to. I want to make that clear, that it's unique to these tribes, but these are central themes. And don't get hung up again on this word stories, because stories are a transfer of information. And I was lucky enough to be told a couple of stories. I actually felt very honored that I was told. Of course, I was not told versions that they would tell their children or their other members of the tribe, because that is information not for me. I am not a tribal member, obviously. The wolf is important to the land and part of the ecosystem. It's healers and cleansers of the land. And of course, through observation, that the wolves will take animals that are potentially injured or sick. And the wolves were teachers that taught people how to hunt, obviously through observation of their hunting skills and how their packs formed. I heard some really terrific information about the mechanisms of the pack and how they are ordered with the alphas first, etc. So indigenous peoples understanding the scientific understandings of wolves, predator-prey dynamics, and other ecological concepts can inform Western science. And this, I wrote up this report, and this is also an appendix in the Fish and Wildlife Service's SSA for the gray wolf in the U.S. So in my research for my PhD, I did a population estimate of gray wolves on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, but I was also extremely interested in their knowledge of wolves, past and present. So I interviewed knowledge holders, wolf knowledge holders from the White Mountain Apache tribe and San Carlos Apache tribes in Arizona. And I asked the same questions that I kind of mentioned to you, that, you know, what is the wolf called? It's for Western Apache, it's Bacho, at least for White Mountain. Ba is big, Cho is like the dog family, so large wolf or large canine. And so starting with that and then asking other questions, but unsolicited question, I did not ask this question about which subspecies I wanted to talk about. And this was just fascinating that these indigenous knowledge holders recognized that there were two different subspecies in Arizona. So this was when I sat down to ask questions, they asked me a question: which wolf do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about the wolf that you guys brought up from Mexico and reintroduced? Or do you want to talk about this old wolf that is no longer here in Arizona? Which is correct. There was a larger wolf that's been extirpated, most likely the plains wolf. So it was the old wolf, and like I said, the wolf that did you bring from Mexico. And that just gave me so much information. I actually did it in another chapter of my dissertation based on what was here historically. And since I have a little bit of time, this was an interesting project. So deviating from the wolves, changing directions here. In 2007, bald eagles were removed from the endangered species, but we did have a petition to list the Sonoran Desert population of bald eagles as a distinct population segment, that's DPS. So in doing this, the Game and Fish Department and the Fish and Wildlife Service had documented a population increase in Arizona over a period of 30 years from intense monitoring. Several of the tribes in Arizona came in with over 150 years, over 200 years of information about nest sites. The desert bald eagle does, as you can see in the pictures, does occupy very unique habitats in Arizona. You can see the saguaro cactus. They occur along reservoirs and on cliff sites. And so what the Native American community was trying to tell us, that they have this information that has been passed on, that when they've gone to nest sites in Arizona, some of the nest sites outside of these reservoirs, are no longer there. And so they were trying to explain to us that you guys don't have all the information. And so they did want the species kept on the Endangered Species Act. Unfortunately, the Fish and Wildlife Service's decision was not to list the bald eagle, but that information did get into our Federal Register notice, our proposed rule. So we did say that we have this Western knowledge, and then we have traditional ecological knowledge. Doing good on time. So I just want to say, if you want more information, I'm going to point you to the National Park Service website. Sorry, it's not Fish and Wildlife Service, but this is an excellent resource with regards to if you want more information on indigenous knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge. There is descriptions and news and guest author columns, excellent resource. So I just had to bring that out. And there's a lot of publications on this topic. There's a lot of publications in the Western science publications, journals, I should say. And several of these books are excellent, including Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Kimmier. That one just came out less than 2 years ago. So there is just a really good resource if people are interested in more information. And I'm going to stop sharing, Lonyx, and I think I'm right at 10 minutes.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Those are some great examples of how you've incorporated your introduction to the people of that region, and a great example in how you were able to utilize some of their relationship knowledge to place to the species that you were studying to enrich your understanding, to enrich the science that you were involved with. And I think that's exactly one of the awesome positive uses. And I think as we transition our humanity's relationship to place, relationship to the landscape, again, this term, traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge, indigenous science. There are lots of words we can use that are getting at a broader thing and that relationship. So I'm glad you reiterated that. And
Thank you.
I'm excited to hear about Kainoa's stories and examples of this relationship. Stories are such a powerful mechanism for transferring knowledge, and that's another component that indigenous peoples do all over the world. The communication, and it has an amazing way. Oral communication has an amazing way of transcending generations. Because have you ever tried to read some Shakespeare or some Old English? And there's a whole lot of adapting your brain you got to do, and a whole lot of what does that term mean? What does it mean in those days? Those translations happen naturally when we're talking about oral histories. And so Kainoa Azuma hails from the windward side of Oahu and is a Kanaka Maoli youth with leading roles in several positions, from the country government to international organizations, a current member of the Honolulu Youth Commission, a youth leader of the International Youth Advocacy Organization, heirs to our oceans, and is recognized as a Kama'ali'i Outstanding Youth Hawaiian Civil Club member by the largest Native Hawaiian organization in the world, the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs. Kainoa hopes ancestral knowledge can become a pillar towards holistic approaches towards climate resilient futures. And Kainoa, it's such an honor to share this space with you. Tell us about this term. Tell us about these relationships. What is this term trying to get after, and what's it trying to explain?
Yeah, mahalo nui, Lonyx, especially for amazing segue with the understanding that a lot of our knowledge comes from oral histories, as we say in our in Olelo Hawaii, or Hawaiian language, mo'olelo, the continuity of the language, of the stories, of the sayings, of the wisdom that passed down each and every generation, and just the recognition that we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. And for me, what it really embodies, this kind of new term coin, and I think it does miss a lot of what I liked what Sarah had said earlier about indigenous knowledge, because it kind of matches what our term is for such, which is ike kupuna, ike to see, to understand, kupuna talking about the sources that came before, or the ancestors. So in that understanding, we're going to carry on that. I don't have a presentation exactly with all the slides and such, so carrying on the oral traditions, definitely going to have to visualize some of what I'm speaking to. But for me, when it comes to indigenous knowledge or ikekupuna, it doesn't only shape our relationship with the environment and what it looks like in it, and just so some people can gain some understanding of what that really looks like. One of the things that I was privileged to experience, and mind you, I'm only 21, so definitely slowly understanding all the decisions that have been past made that have influenced my present, and also the decisions that can be made to influence the future in which I'll also inherit. But looking at where I'm from, and this is the image behind me, which is the Ahupua'a, which is a piece of land that stretches from the mountain to the sea, and encompasses a portion of a few miles offshore. In this understanding, we are revitalizing the Ahupua'a of He'eia, which is where I'm from. You can see here we have a fish pond wall, and a lot of the systems, and I'll just kind of break it down in a nutshell. But one of the things we have to understand about Indigenous people everywhere is we lived as a result of carrying on our cultures of continuity by being immersed in our ecosystems. It wasn't looked at as the environment was separate from our being, which is kind of what we're witnessing now. Last year, just yesterday, actually, there was a big commemoration event for the 130 years since the illegal usurpation with aid of the United States Marines of the Hawaiian Kingdom, which was one of the most progressive nations at its time, actually the most in some arguments. But one of the things we learned in the time being since our ancestors lost that ability of self-determination to now, 130 years later, we're witnessing the decisions made that sort of distinguish environment and people, and even our approaches to conservation. Sometimes it's just, oh, we're restoring the environment to like a pre-contact time when our ancestors weave themselves into systems where they lived in coexistence, and it also benefited the environment. So, for example, looking at our, I don't have a picture of it behind me, but our lo'ikalo systems, which are like rice paddies, where we cultivate our one of our key traditional foods, which some may know as taro. I can't think of the scientific term off the top of my head. But those systems were geared to carry on to hold sediment that would wash off in the uplands, hold sediment as well as and all of that preventing basic, not, I don't want to use the term pollution, but preventing all of that nutrients from all of that soils from covering our reefs and preventing the photosynthesis process that happens in the offshore. And I could, break it down from the kupuna perspective too, but just using these examples of our efforts to cultivate continuity was recognizing, even, in the term ecosystem itself. I always love that word. The Greeks understood it very well. Ekos, meaning home, systema, meaning the system in which we're a part of. So even then, in the Western philosophies, we are a part of the environment. So I can't understand how 130 years has passed, and now we're in a situation where the decisions that are made, where I live on this island in particular, poison water with over 13,000 gallons of fuel leaking into our systems, into our water system, which is our only aquifer. So it makes me sort of wonder, and not only wonder, but it makes me understand how imperative it is to return to these cultures of continuity, to recognize not only the value that they bring in their traditional understandings of the environment that they live in and how they fit into those ecosystems, but also what were the relationships that our ancestors shared with each other, these governing structures, these relationships between each and every one of us that results in a better environment for the generations to come after, as well as ensuring that everybody was fed. Right now I'm at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. That's where I'm calling in from. And we're in the Ahupua'a of Waikiki, meaning water, and Kiki meaning to bubble out, which tells you how valuable it is. Because for us in our ancestral knowledge, vai vai, which means water, water, really, is our word for what determines wealth. It wasn't really money, it was the amount of water you had and how you could feed everybody. That's what we valued, not only feeding ourselves, but ensuring we could feed others too, and keeping those systems in place where we weren't damaging these resources. Recently in the university, there was this big discussion about how it isn't objective to talk about our relationship to the earth as like the earth mother, the sky father, and all these things. But for me, the objective of where we should go is the outcome of that. When we develop relationships, recognizing everything and each and every one of us as family, we don't want to harm our own family. We don't want to harm our earth mother as much as we don't want to harm you and prevent food from going into your mouths. And the outcome of these stories is what has assured continuity for time immemorial. So I think it's a critical thing to look at it beyond just traditional ecological knowledge, but see the social values that each and every one of our communities have to offer by region of what our relationships should be, not only with the resources, or as I say, the sources present, the sources of life, but also the relationships that we share with each other. I hope that's a good kind of closing note to end on, Lonyx, and I hope it didn't go over time. So mahalo nui.
Well, you are not over time, because now we're going to get into some of these questions. And I feel like some of them you've already addressed, but maybe we can reiterate some points. And so, Sarah, I'll start with you with this one. I have a question. And it is, how can we be able to put Indigenous science on the same footing as Western science in the service and academia? So, Sarah, I'm going to pose that for you first.
Oof. Well, that's a big one. I think with this guidance, this has been an evolution, at least in my career and even in my academic career. I gave some examples of how we can incorporate this. I think in my example with my dissertation, I'm a wildlife biologist. I went out to get the tribe, a population estimate of wolves, but I wanted to incorporate this cultural significance and find out, more about the wolf culturally, and hear stories and know about what they knew and what was being passed on from generation to generation. And I just got an incredible amount of information. And I think it's just this respect that this indigenous knowledge, indigenous science is what I also like to call it, is something that is on equal footing, if not more, like you said, Lonyx, of Western science. Incredible information, and it should not be thought of as lesser or anything like that. It should be thought of as equal, if not better information, like my example with the desert bald eagle. I don't know if that answered the question, but it's not a struggle. We're getting there. We're working more. I was happy to see these gray wolf species status assessments incorporating indigenous knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, acknowledging that there's knowledge holders. I'm very optimistic that we'll continue, and we haven't been the best in the past, that's for sure, but we're getting there. And I think we just have to keep improving and keep getting relationships with our Native American community and partners. I hope I answered that.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you're getting to it. Kano, I'm gonna read it one more time. This question, and maybe give me your thoughts on what this question invokes for you. How will you be able to put Indigenous science on the same footing as Western science in the service and academia?
Yeah, I think a big component is recognizing that science cannot be owned by anybody, really. The direct observation of our environment and how we sort of articulate that may be a little different, but nobody can own science. For me, it's like our traditional knowledge is a result of, like I said, living in the ecosystems. And don't get me wrong, over the past several thousand years, we made mistakes too, and we learn from them based on our regions again. So that's very informative of how we still should treat those places. But on top of that, with the Western aspects coming in, and I don't like to use the term Western science, I like to say modern science, because it's really the tools that have reshaped what we can observe and what we can't. Although there are a lot of speculations now for our kupuna wisdom about even our understanding of microbiology, which is kind of phenomenal that's happening here in Hawaii. But just those understanding is looking at it as what is the relationships that these people have developed, and maybe we saw it a little differently too, again going back to these stories about the earth mother and everything, but those were all stories crafted or hakud, as we would say, by individuals who are directly observing those environments and articulating to non-technical audiences to shape everybody's behavior, so we weren't poisoning the water, poisoning the land, and messing with the air either, and disrupting these natural systems. So it's really just reshaping and redefining and reframing how we even talk about both subjects. And I will say, and this doesn't have to do with the ecosystem, but I don't recall our people bleeding out the sick in order to get all the bad blood out. We actually tried plant medicines and all kinds of other things, but that's like a whole nother story for a whole nother day. And it's not all a linear way in which we've developed our relationships to come to the understanding, or as we say, the schools of knowledge that we inhibit. But just taking the time to see where have your perspectives come from and looking at it from an equal footing. Again, nobody can own science. It's all direct observation of our environment. So how do our stories, how do our relationships inform us to have better outcomes? I think is just should be the bottom line critical. There's no sense in getting to all these strong technicalities if everyone's still not acting upon such knowledge, which I think our communities, indigenous communities in particular, have been really strong on shaping, again, those social dynamics on top of weaving in the technical knowledge based on the observation of said environments. And I'll stop there. Mahalo.
Excellent.
Thank you, Kanoa. So we have another question. It's I am interested in learning more about traditional ecological knowledge that is specific to my geographic ecotype. Where can I find more information? And my answer to that one is building those relationships with the people who have been there for a long, long time, in the event that they still exist in that space. In the event that it is entirely colonized with newcomers, and there isn't really a remnant of the indigenous understanding, indigenous perspective, I think rekindling those understandings coming from a different philosophy. There's definitely an Indian country or tribal country, native country, no matter where you go, indigenous country, no matter where you go, there's never a one-stop shop. And again, back to that relationship. Sarah, if you have a point to add to that, I want to invite you to do so.
I think you did that. I think you answered that excellent. The San Carlos Apache tribe are doing quite a bit of interviewing elders on doing some stream restoration and talking to, again, knowledge holders about what the streams look like previously, how they've been changing via climate change and just changing in general from water impoundment, and how species have changed. So, and that's specific to this one area. To Arizona. I did read a real quick, very briefly, because I'm going out of my area of expertise. These geologists were studying the Pacific Northwest, a tsunami that had happened several hundred years ago, and they were finding evidence within the substrate. And when they talked to, I kept going, well, why aren't they talking to the Native American community? Well, they finally did, and the Native American community in the Pacific Northwest said, all you had to do was come talk to us. We knew about this. We have stories about this. So it's one of these things where, again, you said it so eloquently earlier, just standing on the shoulders of the ancestors and just passing on this information. So. And I actually have that paper.
Kanoa.
Yeah, mahalo, and mahalo, Sarah, for sharing that point. I don't know when the date of that tsunami was, but I think we have stories too. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, just throwing that one out there. But building off of that point, I think one of the more stronger points too is recognizing that, and this is something that was told to me by one of my teachers. His name was Kimio Nakane, restores fish pond walls, and he told this to a bunch of future principals that the university had in a class. And he said, "Are you here because you're entitled to learn, or are you here asking?" because that makes quite the difference too. Again, going back to the relationships, even though the IPCC said, hey, all the people we've been killing across the planet for the past couple hundred years, we now need to look at and ask for answers. Don't think that relationship's just gonna go in an instance, because we all need to it's gonna take a lot of healing time too. But that's part of it too. These communities, we also recognize how critical it is, because again, culture of continuity. For us in Hawaii, you're either a part of the collective or you're not. And it's always a kako thing, as we say, a collective effort moving forward. But if you're not going to want to be a part of it, then don't damage those people, and don't make decisions that are going to harm the children too. That's a big no-no here in the Pacific. But again, really going back, if you want to cultivate those relationships, don't go in entitled to learn because this is happening to us, but go in asking, take the time. And it's never easy, but it ain't easy times. I hate to break it to you.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Let's see. Let's get at another one of these questions. Can you share an example of where conservation efforts could potentially be better or more effective if we included indigenous knowledge, where pieces of the puzzle are or were missing and TEK was able to connect those dots? My take on that is, in generally speaking, relationship again, right? We've all said that a few times. It's about the relationship, and when you're tapping into data, information, knowledge, with people who have beyond just their existence experiences with a specific place, they're going to ask questions. If we want to learn to measure something, or if we want to measure something, right? So now we're getting back into more modern science. Can you measure it? Working with your cultural practitioners, you may ask better questions. You may evaluate better factors and components than you would without that. And with that, you might be able to find ecotypes that exist that you couldn't see because you didn't have that relationship. But the indigenous people of that region understood that, hey, there's these slight morphological differences. We can see them. And now you can set your scope for maybe some genetics work, genetic measurements in regards to that. So in general, I'm saying the type of question, the type of thing you would look to measure, at bringing it back to modern science, can get its foundation and base from that indigenous perspective. And to reiterate some of the points that Kainoa was making is, a whole lot was put into this disenfranchisement of these understandings and these awarenesses and attempts to sever the relationship. And in almost every case, that wasn't completely accomplished. So there are remnants still there, but many of our indigenous communities are still putting those pieces together. Lots of it exists. Lots of different people hold a different piece to the overall big picture of the puzzle. So back to that question specifically, knowing what type of thing to measure, you might ask better questions in the context of modern scientists with that relationship. Kainoa, do you got any ideas or thoughts around this?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think one of the key things that we can learn, right, is regarding implementation. Our ancestors were always looking for better ways and better practices, yet we struggle to implement things today. And even though us two, we're one of the first. What's interesting about Hawaii is we were the first non-European recognized nation that then structured in a similar way to the other European nations. So we did have these understandings of departments and all of these things, but we still yet somehow implemented technology in a way that was phenomenal to better our communities, to better so many different things. And I could go on tangents for days. But for me, it's the biggest thing is like the implementation to better solutions and how we look at the natural world. Because, for example, like right now, with again tying into like the Red Hill disaster, which we're witnessing, which is really bad. A horrid experience, but just like PFAS and which is like a forever chemical that you drink, you can get extremely sick. But here we are arguing, well, it can bioacclimate, which basically means it's just going down into the environment and continuing to spread. And then we may start eating our fish and having all of that affect our bodies over time as it bioacclimates. But maybe we should just start using a different kind of fire retardant then. I don't know. So it's like those kinds of things like let's not even justify how it even gets there. And let's just start making the changes now. Good example too, in the Pacific, nowadays we can start utilizing new technologies to take from our food systems to start making fuel as well to supply our combustible engines and such. And one of the tie-ins, right, going back to the whaling industry, which we also experienced, when we killed all the whales, we ran out of oil, and then we transitioned over to all of the stuff that's dead animals in the ground, and now we're running out of that too, and we're still waiting to run out of it to make the transition. I don't understand why we're repeating our histories here to come up with the same problems. Maybe we need to start jumping the gun a little, like our ancestors did. Like, for example, this fish pond, developed it, and it lasted for over 700 years to feed our communities by enclosing a certain part of the reef where we didn't have to go fishing anymore. It was all right there. And we made sure all the uplands were taken care of so we could still fish from here. But it's all of these systems and these technologies and the idea of implementation and how we implement it. And again, it's a little different. I never needed to sign a piece of paper to help my auntie or my uncle or the earth mother. And so we need to take holistic approaches, even as departments, to start looking at ourselves as family, and how we solve these problems that our children are facing, which is the biggest part of the puzzle. No sense in doing all of this if our future isn't so bright, especially for them. We need to feed them not only physically and with nourishment, but also intellectually too. And providing that space, I think, is key. What that looks like, I know even our bosses are all asking that question too. But if we just have to keep asking the right questions and going in the right direction, I think. Sorry, I don't know if that's a good note to end on, but implementation is key, and how we implement, I think, is where our traditional knowledge can really be used as well.
Yeah, broadening our mindset, opening up, and that relates to some of the comments that are coming in the chat box. Well, I would like to stick with this a little bit more and get your perspective on this, Kanoa. And that is, my understanding is that the islands at one point was about, they supported about the same population as currently exists, without having to ship 80% of all the things that are needed to do that. What's up with that?
Is that the question of what happened? Well, what's interesting, right, is now through our understand, even though for the longest time our ancestors have been saying, our elders, I should say, our elders have been saying what the population was and what lifestyles look like prior. And now, as you can see here, restoring our traditional food systems, even the modern science is starting to realize actually how much people we could have fed, because it's mind-blowing, the accomplishments that we had here in Hawaii. And even if you read Captain Cook's logs, when they came here and all of the different adventurers who discovered our islands came here, one of the first things they wrote down in all the journals is the monumental food systems that were here. And the one thing that we could have been used by, I can't remember whose logs it was exactly, but the one thing that we just needed was to be turned into plantation workers. So then later, after the illegal overthrow in 1893 and the usurpation of our government, the Committee of Safety, which were 13 businessmen, all white, and then with relationship to some to with the right relationships also with Minister Stevens, who illegally lands United States Marines to aid in what would be an illegal coup against a native government. After that, they started dismantling the food systems, dismantling the religious sites, and then transitioning everything to monocrop sugar production, where now we go from these relationships, even in our food structure, where we have this Malka to Makai understanding, as well as the food forest models, which honored holistic systems just in the uplands alone, to transitioning to only relying on one crop and also risking all the diseases that come with that commodity versus our diverse food systems, which wouldn't be implement which it would be a struggle for disease to develop and spread given the diversity of what was located in our food systems. But the transition from the monocrop production and then later on the sugar industry dying, which our sugar helped supply during the Civil War for the United States. But the sugar industry died off and then it transitioned into hotels. So again, a solid example of how sustainability from a I don't want to say pre-contact, but holistically minded society transitioning into this idea of commodity, this look at things as resources, things we extract to use to benefit the me and not the we, versus our ancestral wisdom that everything was just a source, a kumu, as we would say, a source of life that we had to honor. We always had to honor the spirit of the land, the spirit of the air, the spirit of the water, which is, if I spelled that right, the law. So we do need to return to those systems and recognize there's been a lot of disenfranchisement, but still we're still here holding on. So maybe we need to start listening to these people on what they need to again return Hawaii in our case back to a self-sufficient island chain, especially with much of the problems we're seeing with shipping and inflation. And list goes on. You guys know this. So yeah, mahalo.
So again, relationship, the connection, and then it's bigger than just connection to place. It's connection to place, connection to people of place, rekindling some of those remnants that are there and still exist, rediscovering those, or I should say, reemerging a renaissance. Those are the things on how we get this right. And I think in our short time of this experiment of the Americas or of the United States and things like that, I think for conservation minded people, we can see where business as usual is not working. Okay. And perhaps now that we're at the brink of more catastrophe and a deeper catastrophe involving all of humanity, not just people we at one point looked to remove from space because we had a different idea for space. Those rekindlings, getting back to those things, a different mindset. Those are some of the things that I've heard. This is how we right the ship, and going back to some of those traditional understandings. And some of our ancestors' wisdom and practices within given spaces. That to me is how we get this right. And it's bigger than just the measurable. The measurable is part of it, right? And that's where the science falls in. But this indigenous relationship, indigenous philosophies are something bigger than just the measurable or the box that science kind of falls within in its measuring. My take on it is it's all tools, and indigenous peoples are the first. Hey, if you got a better tool, you got a tool that makes sense, a tool that makes it more efficient, I want to use that, and I want to do that. And forever and ever, indigenous peoples embrace those things, not to forget how to do our other ways too, not to forget how to use rocks and other things to fashion them into things that we need to make tools and things like that. But we are all about using the older technologies, and we're all about using new technologies. And it's all encompassing, one big onion that has so many layers to it that are beyond just the realm of science. That's what we're getting at. And as it pertains to science, you're going to ask better questions. You're gonna find measurables that tell you a bigger part of the story. And yeah, and I think this is a great start to some of our TEK concept. And I would like to invite you all to join us over the next 3 weeks. So we have the live stream here at the NCTC. We have the live stream with you all. And then the 3 weeks in between, I will be hosting a very similar topic around understanding this term of TEK. And I will get that to Jen, our wonderful host here doing this broadcast. And I want to thank you, Jen, for sharing the time and space with Kainoa and Sarah and myself, and taking a deeper dive into this concept that needed more than just an hour. So we've scratched the surface. We've begun. Look to Jen for the Zoom if you all would like to continue on learning, contributing, participating in this process of understanding the term of traditional ecological knowledge and beyond. You can join us on our Zoom. And the Indian Natural Resource Science and Engineering program here at Cal Poly Humboldt will be addressing and staying with this topic over the next 3 weeks. We have some phenomenal speakers coming. Dr. Frank Lake, Dr. Daniel Leip, aka Bubba, as well as Keith Parker, senior fisheries biologist and geneticist for the Yurok tribe. All of them will also be sharing their take on traditional ecological knowledge, the term, and indigenous science, and where it fits into this big picture. And then we will wrap up February 15th with our final live stream broadcast here with you all. Jen?
February 14th. But thank you. Yes, we're off a day because we have a weird conflict. But yes. We'll talk, Lonyx.
Wednesdays are when we roll our speaker series. Just saying. I don't know where you all go making these changes without talking, buddy, but
that's how the federal government rolls, right? We do these things and we're not consistent.
well,
I'm sorry.
We will help you. Lean on us. Look to us to help you.
Thank you. Lonyx, thank you so much for facilitating. You are fantastic. And Sarah and Kainoa for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been wonderful hearing from both of you. Kainoa, I'm so excited that you're in this little fold, from the Night Calc family and growing. So we look forward to seeing more engagement with you. And Sarah, thank you for filling in with us today and helping us. It's really good to hear your experiences. Today, as you've heard, you realize you've heard from a service subject matter and a young Indigenous leader. And next month, we will continue this discussion with Lonyx facilitating. We'll hear from Sierra Green with Nez Perce and Jerry Jandro and Anishabi Ojibwe, both subject matter experts on Indigenous science from the Northwest and Midwest. And we are operating on a slightly different schedule in February. We will be broadcasting on Tuesday, February 14th. I got to get with Lonyx on that. It's a day ahead of our normally scheduled time. And as a reminder, each broadcast is recorded and available on NCTC's website. So if you wish to learn more about past recordings, to be added to the mailing list for future recordings, please just email myself, Jennifer_Hill at fws.gov. Thank you all for joining today.
Mahalo nui.
Thank you.
Malama po.
Thank you.